Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Lee Coyne for his presentation entitled Blending Generations, Youth and Elders. Lee has been a member of WICL since 2013. Prior to retirement, Lee worked as a journalist, a therapist, and a radio and TV show host. His presentation will spotlight a creative series of senior center events in Queens, New York. These events, inspired by the time that Lee spent with his grandparents, intentionally link youth and elders. They include puppetry, gardening, and interviewing immigrants. He will conclude with describing an activity that brought the generations together and understanding love through the ages. Please welcome Lee.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Good. When you woke up this morning, when we up this morning, how many felt ready to chill out? Literally. Anyway, once upon a time, many years ago in 1941, in a place that was somewhat east of Manhattan, there's an obscure place where I was born. It's called Brooklyn. And this story starts in Brooklyn 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor, November 26th, the day I was born. My father, let me see if we can get my father's picture on. How do we change the picture? See. Oh, that one, okay. Okay. Would you believe that once upon a time I had hair, and I found out an old picture of me back in Brooklyn, Little Lee, back in 1941, and I was told that I won a beautiful baby contest over in Charleston, South Carolina, but I've deteriorated just slightly since those days. Anyway, my dad, should we put my dad? Okay. Okay, this is my late dad, Al Coyne, who loved to do fishing and play tennis. He was the first father in all of Brooklyn to be drafted into World War II. You're looking at the ploy that failed. He appealed it because my mother didn't court him quickly enough, and he lost the appeal and went off to Italy and Corsica in World War II. Meanwhile, my mother moved in with my grandma, grandpa, aunt, and uncle. This is very unusual because I grew up in a family of 5 adults, and this is not the customary way. So at an early age, I learned multiple choice. If adult number 1 didn't do my bidding, I go to a Court of Appeals, adult number 2 and 3 and 4. And they're those who really know me know that I like multiple choice in life. And that's really, in a nutshell, the story of who I am, my heart and soul. Okay. We see down there a picture of the Statue of Liberty. How many of you have seen the Statue of Liberty in person? Okay. This is more than a picture to me. I grew up looking at my grandma's window every day and seeing the Statue of Liberty. It was only a mile and a half from our front window, and it had a very deep personal meaning to me because my grandparents were immigrants. They came through Ellis Island, and they told me about what life was like in their home country of all places, Ukraine. They escaped from the Ukraine back in, I think it was 1908. First they went to Prussia, and then they escaped and came to Brooklyn, New York, as we say in the old country, New York. Any event, that imprint left in me because I appreciated at a young age what being overseas and escaping from the Tsar was like. And actually later in life, I did pay a trip to the Ukraine with my late wife, who brought me into ICL. And they had a very beautiful carpet museum for those of you who have never been to Kiev. Very nice place. They also had apricot ice cream, which I've never seen any place else in the world. Anybody have apricot ice cream? Okay. Apricot. I have to enunciate my words completely nice, right? Okay. Okay. Going onward. Okay. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Years later, we're going back, fast forward to 1975. In 1975, I got my first job in social work gerontology at the Rochdale Village Senior Center. And I'll show that a little later. But back in Brooklyn, trolley cars were the mode of travel. And I used to ride them with my mommy while my daddy was overseas in Italy. And that's how it looked. I still remember Judy Garland's ding, 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 went the trolley, poop, 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 went the bell. And that also still has a place in my heart. Just like Professor Bobby said, clothes congeal your memories, so do songs from the old days. I remember things like Chicory Chick, Chalak Chalak, Balaka Wallaka in a Bananica, and Lavender Blue Dilly Dilly. Some of you still remember some of those old songs. And I'm Looking Over the Four-Leaf Clover was another one of my old favorite songs way back when. Okay. So we used to ride the trolley cars and all, and I have very fond memories of my grandparents. Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Beatrice, who was an artist, Uncle Harold, who I called my Uncle Superman, and my mother. And they had lasting influences on my life to be. And so back in 1975, when I got my first social work job, I still harbor those memories of Grandma and Grandpa and old people. And when I was called upon to put together programs for the Rochdale Senior Center, those memories of Grandma and Grandpa instilled in my heart something to go by. It was my platform of program planning for the elderly. I was only 33 then. I was a young dude. But I was able to associate with older dudes and dudesses because of the fond memories of Grandma Molly and Grandpa David. Grandpa David died a little early, and Grandma Molly got her second husband and outlived them too. And she used to walk down with powder and lipstick down Fifth Avenue, Brooklyn, and flirt with all the shopkeepers there. And that was my memory of Grandma Molly, still like a geriatric butterfly. So let's move forward and see what else we have. Okay. Here we are. This is the scene of the crime, Rochdale Village. Have any of you ever heard of Rochdale Village? No. Rochdale happened to have been the first builder in England of co-ops. And this place, Rochdale Village, had 20,000 people. It was right near Kennedy Airport. What made it interesting was two things. It had 5 buildings like that, which were around a circle, and it had two shopping malls, its own police station, and its own library. It was a little city unto itself, and that formed my beginning of my career in social work, and I became a community organizer, not just Kate's work, but I helped to develop them and help to guard them because there's something different that you can't see from the outside of the building. This community had mainly Jewish elderly and black middle class. And they were often the targets of people who were drug dealers. And in those days, you may remember the Social Security used to come in your own mailbox, not to the bank. No, well, and people would take their mailbox and go to the bank, cash the Social Security checks forward, and then bring it home. But the drug dealers got wise to that, and what they did is that they saw a senior citizen coming home presumably with their money on the 3rd of the month, which is Social Security Day, and they'd go up in the elevator and they would trap them with a knife or a gun and rob them, steal them. So that was a big, big danger threat in those days. And I helped to bring in the police that teach the older people how to protect themselves and all. But we won't go into that. That's a different story for a different day. Lower? Higher? Oh, you got me now? Do you hear me loud and clear, baby? Okay. Carry forth. So it's from the people from these buildings became my audience, and I did various program planning for them. And so I'm going to get into there. I'll give you an outline before we go into it. Program planning. Okay. Program planning. These were people who either lived with their spouse or many of them lived alone, widows and widowers. And we wanted to give them a sense of spirit, something to do, because we didn't want them to have empty lives. They were now the minority in Rochdale Village, and they wanted a sense of purpose, like all of us do in our everyday life. So I did a reflection back to my older days with my grandparents and see what could I connect from the future. And because I was a young kid living with my older grandparents, that platform, that model stuck in my heart. And what I did is try to carve out some intergenerational programs. And that's why we call this Blending Generations, because I blended with Grandma and Grandpa Coyne then, and I figured, let's do it again. And that was my inspiration. Now you know my secret. Okay. Now, as I said, what happened is we had different ethnicities, and part of it was immigrants, so that also went into the configuration of the programs I developed. So let's move forward. The 3 or 4 things that we're going to do are puppetry, gardening, writing immigrant stories from actual immigrants in a way that kids never get the opportunity to interview people out of their textbook from that generation. And it was very unique at the time, 1985, which ironically was 50 years ago, and it coincided with the United States' 200th birthday, 1976. Now it's 2026. So we were reflecting, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, we had a special event for Valentine's Day where we brought the 2 generations together, and we talked about what it's like to go dating back in the days of Charlie Chaplin to the days of the Beatles. A little different. And it was very unique and very fun-loving. Okay. Let's get to the next picture. Okay. A mission with motivation. Well, we'll get to that a little later, but in any event, I grew up in the days of Howdy Doody and Rudy Kazootie puppets. Anybody here remember those people? Howdy Doody, Rudy Kazootie? Well, that inspired me. And we had a lot of people, senior citizens, who were garment workers in their old days. Consequently, they had experience in sewing, and they created a needlecraft group. I remember there was needlecraft and Bargello and sewing and knitting and those kind of things. I learned for the first time, because guys don't usually know about the different brands of sewing, but gals more often do. So what we did is we decided to have a puppet theater that would make puppets and then write a script, and finally to put on shows for the local nursery schools in Jamaica, Queens. and entertain the little kids. And that was a blending of generations, the very young ones and the rather old ones. I don't want to say super old. They weren't quite that yet. But in any event, let's see if we could get them forward. Yes, there we are, puppets. And this is not the puppet they made, but this is a facsimile. So what we did in those good old days was to have the Neil Craft group come up with some puppets that they could make for the puppet theater. We called it Puppeteers Without Tears. And these were the people who made the puppets from scratch using their own imagination. And it's always fun to have older people use their imagination, not just think back on things that they've had, but go into a whole new imaginary world. It's creative. All of you probably have created some things in the last year, and it'll be your turn to come to the podium and tell about it then. Then we went to the writers group. Most senior centers have a writers group, and we were no exception. And the writers group wrote a script. I call it scriptees. And in any event, they wrote a script for the puppets to play out. And then we hired a coach who would be a drama coach, and he would coach the senior puppeteers on how to make it real, how to take the puppets and use their ability to speak with the coach's help. And we did puppet shows around town, and that was very well appreciated by the little kids. Now, little kids in that day and age, and even more so now, are separated, for the most part, from their grandparents. And most of them hardly ever see older people up close unless they live near their grandparents, which is the exception. How many people live near their grandparents? Very few. That proves the point. And so what we did is we had these senior puppeteers go around town and entertain the young ones. And it was almost like being reunited with a surrogate grandparent, somebody in their age. And another time I'll tell you, but I think a lot of the juvenile delinquency in the present generation is because grandparents aren't around to help guide the kids beyond the parents who have to check jobs and aren't there to guide their kids all around. And into that void falls the potential juvenile delinquency. Just throwing a little philosophy in here, but give it some thought as to whether you think the divorce of grandparents from the home front has an impact on making kids get, we'll say, less moral, less ethical, and more risk taker today. That's my personal opinion. Okay. Next picture, next thing, beyond the puppets. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a terribly stenchful, new word, stenchful, and rodent-infested trash dump in Rochdale that everybody hated, people would complain about, but nobody really did anything about it. And one day I came across a foundation grant being offered to do a community project. So I decided to take the bull by the horns and write to that foundation, and sure enough, I was able to get money to start a garden in where the trash dump had been. And I thought that was a good, inspiring thing for the community at large, not just the senior citizens. So what we did is something, again, that's intergenerational. We took the senior citizens, first we got the co-op to clean out the total trash dump and all the rats that went with it, and instead flatten it out. Then we hired a extension service expert on gardening, and I learned for the first time peat mire fencing and a chicken fence wire and stuff, all stuff that had to do with gardening that I never knew about. but it was brand new to me. So final step was to unite Boy Scouts and senior citizens as plots to share the garden, to share it, and grow vegetables and fruits in that gardens, in that former Trump trash dump that now had sprouted like a new, like somewhat of the story of Israel, which I learned had been a desert and then grew into usable, viable soil and all. Yeah, I didn't think of it at the time, but that's what it is. So we were able to, we called that Operation Green Thumb. And Operation Green Thumb had the senior citizens and the, well, first of all, they extended the pipes which had carried the water from the outside into the garden, because gardens without water don't grow. Then we got the Boy Scouts to do the heavy work of tilling the soil and planting the seeds, and the senior citizens watered the hose and made the garden grow by nurturing it. And it worked beautifully. And that first autumn, we had a harvest festival where we invited the entire community and we gave out harvest. It was harvest time, and it was beautiful. And it was a special event that I never dreamed of, but we got the community to bloom inside, in a sense. And I was very proud as being the behind-the-scenes daddy of Operation Green Thumb. So that was project number 2. Now we go to project number 3. Okay. All of you have heard of immigrants or migrants. This is a picture, not of my migrants, but a lot of these had either been Jewish immigrants that were survivors of the Holocaust and World War II, and they came from over 20 different countries. They also came from the West Indies. We had people from Barbados. One of the fellows actually helped to dig the Panama Canal back in the early 1900s. He had survived to about age of 98. John Whitcoff Bowen. He was also a preacher's son. Very lovely guy who wrote poetry. You have people in your mind who are sort of special role models to you along the way. We all do have that experience. So this was the year of 1975, 1976. That Statue of Liberty was having its 100th birthday. It came from France, which our friend Gwen Ellen has an association with, right? Okay. And that Statue of Liberty inspired in me the idea of why don't we reach out to college journalists, writers who love to write, and have them for the first time in their life ever to interview the immigrant senior citizens about their individual stories. We got 28 people from about 20 different countries, and I still have it. I could have brought the thing here. We called it the Ellis Island Digest. And each of the student journalists interviewed a senior citizen. We paired them up one-to-one, and they told their story. A lot of them really loved to release it because they had it locked inside of them, and they had nobody to tell it to. I had one person who's now deceased named Helen Gluck. Helen Gluck wanted to tell her story, but she was afraid of it. This is a very unusual turn in the road. And Helen held off doing her story because she was afraid that if her daughter, who's still alive, read it, her daughter would be scared, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to confront her daughter with questions on that. She died 2 weeks before the publication took place. Very ironic. And that was Helen's story about, I think, she grew up in Czechoslovakia, I believe. We had Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Lithuania. I remember the story about somebody who took his first girlfriend on a date in a cherry orchard in Lithuania. You know, a very heartwarming story about his first date in a cherry orchard. But you know, all of these things were meaningful to these persons, and it was a way to share it with the outer world for the first time. And for the kids would never really get to speak to a living, breathing person who had been through the war on a usual basis. So this is a way beyond the textbook. They were able to interview and ask probing questions. What was it like to grow up in Austria? What was it like to just escape Hitler's forces by the skin of your teeth? And I would like to see this replicated here in Salem, that we can have students from Willamette here, or Western Oregon University, or possibly Corbin College, Corbin University now. And I think it would be beautiful connecting the generations together to have students interview immigrant elderly people. So, thought for the future. Now we go to the next picture, chroniclers. Yeah, they did the chronicle about what life was like and all, and this is a picture of how they would probably look. In Rochdale, they had a lot of outdoor park benches, so sitting on a park bench and a young person talking to an elderly person in the warmer weather outside and just shooting the breeze and all, warming up the conversation. It was a way to connect the generation. And I truly believe that the generations together, talking in a dialogue and becoming friends, not just strangers, is something that would help heal our rather broken universe and our society here, which has been further exacerbated by the nameless president of the United States. You could guess who it is. Okay. How much more time do we have?
Just 18 minutes.
Okay, I will go on. I hope you're enjoying all this stuff so far. To me, it was very meaningful. We talked about Thrash Dump, we talked about Ellis Island. Okay. We will go now. Okay. Well, whatever. Okay. Yeah, there might be another one. Okay. Now, how many of you have lived through Valentine's Day in your younger life and had dates once upon a time? Came Valentine's Day in Rochdale Village, and I said, this would be a cool opportunity to get the generations together again. But from the days of Charlie Chaplin to the Beatles is a big transition in history. So I concocted a little scheme. We invited, I think, 3 Girl Scouts who were in their mid-teens, who were already in early dating, and 3 senior citizens who had been in their early dating many years before. Obviously, the scenarios were slightly different, as you can imagine. And so we had them describe what dating was like in their era and then ask questions of each other. And it was a lot of fun. From what I remember, some of the questions or some of the observations were that in the days of our grandparents, they would often have people, what they call it, people who guide you? Chaperones, right. They would have chaperones. The kids never heard of chaperones. It blew their minds, to use verbal commentary. Chaperones, what are those? What do we need them for, man? No way, no way. They would say something like that. And, you know, it was funny, but it was also ironic. And I thought it was because generations don't really talk to each other that often about what life used to be like, and the grandparents don't necessarily hear what life is like today, which is a big U-turn and all. And sometimes there's misunderstanding because of the lack of knowledge. And I'm sure many of you here in my extended family here have experienced talking to your grandchildren and somehow getting a disconnect. I don't remember that. What was it? How did that happen? How did you do that and all? And I really think that part of what we need in our society is more understanding, more communication between grandparents and grandchildren, and to understand each other's differences and appreciate those differences. Not sit judgmentally, oh, my generation was better than yours and yours is a downer. That's no way to go. That will just create distance. I want understanding, and that's my idealistic point of view and all. So these are just some of the things that inspired me from my personal experience growing up in Brooklyn, New York, and living with 5 grandparents, including my Uncle Harold, also known as Uncle Superman. And I'm going to throw in something a little extra that is an early sign of my creative wanderlust. My grandmother was a landlady in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. She and my grandfather had 2 houses. On her roller top desk, she had a typewriter, the old type where had ribbon and you ring a bell before computers ever existed. And she let me go and play with her typewriter. I decided that typewriters have more than letters on them, but they have different symbols. And so at the age of 3 or 4, I began drawing pictures of faces with typewriters. So I'm describing to you my childhood experience. You'll get a kick out of this. Imagine that a bunch of, what do they call them? Not commas, but what's the 2 commas together? Yeah, a bunch of quote marks become the crew cut on the top of a head. The ears are parentheses in either direction. The eyes are parentheses, a dot, and another parentheses done twice for both ears. The slants or the slashes in opposite directions become the nose. And finally, the teeth. Take this home with you and try it out. Now you do it on your computer. The teeth are a bunch of parentheses, a bunch of equal marks, and a closing parenthesis, and that becomes the teeth. And realize at the age of 4, I was pulling this off and drawing pictures of people's faces with a typewriter. And that's the early sign of my pre-sparkle of life, I guess we can call it and all. So that's part of what I did way back when. And I'm going to throw in one extra thing that's not part of the program, but I thought it was interesting. Oh, my major in college was international relations. Interestingly enough, I did hope and want to be a diplomat someday, but I never quite made it because I was terrible in math. So good in social studies and English, but terrible in math. So now, recently I was thinking, I'm concerned about my ancestral homeland, the Ukraine. And even though I'm not a diplomat today, I try to brainstorm and think, what would I do if I were put in the situation of being a mentor to the president, heaven forbid? What I would do, this would be my solution. You're welcome to bring it out to the larger community. As I understand it, Russia has occupied 20% of the Ukraine. Russia wants to keep all 20%. On the other side of the fence, the Ukraine wants back all 20% of what it lost. If you do an exact compromise and cut it right down the middle, what I would prescribe, Dr. Coyne here, what I would prescribe is that give 10% back to the Ukraine, so it gets half of their wish, and leave 10% to Russia, so it gets half of their wish. I think that would be the fairest unfair compromise, and that would be my thing. Halfway, you get half of what you want, you get half of what you want, no side gets all of what it wants. That's my idealistic thought for the future of our nation and our country and all. I'm going to end it with, because I like to do poetry, the search for peace shall never cease. Thank you.
Just raise your hand if you have a question.
That's good. It's called me. Great. I'm so sorry.
Any curious minds here?
Oh, here you go.
Speak up.
Just say your name first.
Hi, I'm Bethany. I'm new here, so thanks for having me. But Lee, I just want to say thank you for your presentation, and I wonder how long did you work at that facility in Rochdale?
I worked 10 years from 1975 to 85, and it closed out just at the time that the Statue of Liberty was having its 100th birthday and all. But you can see the experience I had way back with my grandparents being immigrants. And by the way, I want to add that where I grew up on the wall, they had pictures of the two World War II leaders on the wall, Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. So I wouldn't say brainwashed, but I was influenced at an early age, and they would read the war news to me. I remember, this is Gabriel Heater in the news, or good morning, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all the ships at sea, this is Walter Winchell. That's how that is. And this is Lowell Thomas on top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And we talk about those things. So those things are still embedded in my mind. And I don't know, people tell me I have a photographic mind somewhat. Maybe I do. I'm not trying to brag on anything, but I can't let go of things of the past. It's really part of who I am.
Lee, this is Jim. As you know, I'm also a New Yorker, and my experience with Brooklyn
My condolences.
Yeah, my experience with Brooklyn was always Flatbush Avenue and the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yes.
But one of the questions I had when you mentioned the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, in my day, not that long ago really, in the 90s perhaps, Ellis Island was just as much of an attraction as the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
A lot of people would go there to look up their family backgrounds and see who came over and when, and they have a really good system there for finding that. Mm-hmm. Did you ever do that with your family, or?
I went to Ellis Island. It was then converted into the museum. Before they had it, I had an idea that didn't come to fruit to make it the head of the Peace Corps, because that's very international, but that was just an idle idea of mine. And it does have exhibits of different things of the immigrants coming over, and I think they also included some tapes, some sound records, things of actual experiences and what it was like in that day and age. Jim, what was your experience like?
I enjoyed it very much. I only had one part of my family. My mom's mom came over from Ireland one generation before her. And so I was interested in reading about the Cahills, which was her family name. Mm-hmm. And I just was very impressed with how they had modernized everything and made it easily accessible. And like you said, there were recordings and things like that were fun to listen to. And I think these days, when you do a tour of the Statue of Liberty, you also stop at Ellis Island. Yes. For a certain amount of time.
And by the way, Liberty Island was once called Bedloe's Island, but most people don't remember that anymore. And I think it's actually in New Jersey, on the New Jersey side.
Just say your
name. Very close. Go for it.
My name's Malia, and is it possible to read the stories that you got from the immigrants when you worked there? Like, is that printed?
I don't know. I have probably the last copy of the book. It was sort of a softcover magazine.
Yeah.
And I 28 different things. I could give you my email, and if you want, I could read you the story. Coin 1980, Coin C-O-Y-N-E 1941. Anybody here want me to read them? Maybe some people from their home country or people they know. You know. And these stories were all written by students, not by the senior citizens. So it was a way to activate students to learn social studies on a one-to-one basis, which is hardly ever done any place in the country. How would that affect you if you had a chance to interview somebody who played a part in history? You'd cool it? It'd be cool. Yeah. What would you think, Fred? If somebody wanted to interview you about what life was like in your young day and age, way back when, once upon a time. So this is Estonia. Yeah. Oh, Smithsonian. Okay, yeah. Okay. We have another Tom out there, beating us Tom. Go for it, Tom.
Okay, I'm Tom, if you didn't already know. First of all, I want to thank you for a lot of the really interesting stories of your youth and your life that you shared with us today. It was lots of fun to see that. And but what I was also interested in is the common theme between the earlier presentation we had and your presentation, and that is the increasing problem of what you might call intergenerational alienation. And I was impressed with the number of ways you came up with for overcoming intergenerational alienation in ways that would actually kindle the curiosity of young people while validating the experience of older people. So I didn't really have a question so much as more of just a compliment. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. I agree with you 100%. If you have ever been to a senior center, in 9 cases out of 10, I would guess, they march in a group of young people to the senior center. They entertain them, they sing, they dance, etc., etc. But there's hardly any one-to-one communication, and that doesn't really help bind the generations into understanding. So that's something that each of us, in our own way, can fight for and try to get the generations together. Because I truly believe, and I think many of you believe, that if the generations, grandparents and grandchildren, do have more communication, we'd have a stronger society at large. Idealist speaking.
We have one more question. Lee, one more question.
Yeah, actually more of a comment than a question. I'm Don.
Encore.
I just wanted to share that my paternal grandmother came with her family from Finland and went through Ellis Island, and they wound up in the boondocks of northern Minnesota. They came from Finland and they found a place that was equally cold and mosquito infested, so they wound up in northern Minnesota.
They call that land of 10,000 mosquitoes.
But so they lived, like I said, out in the boondocks, so there were no colleges nearby. But my grandmother did something even better than sharing it with a college student. She wrote a book about it and had it self-published, and it never made the New York Times bestseller list. But it's been a real treasure for her grandkids, her kids and her grandkids. And so my suggestion to the audience here is that write your memoirs, share your memoirs with your grandkids. So.
I have no grandkids, but I will tell you this week, I just published my 3rd book in honor of Ben Franklin, my hero. It's called Adages of the Ages in Franklin's Footsteps, and I hope to have it publicized in Philadelphia, where Ben Franklin did his yeoman work. So if you see Adages for the Ages, which includes, if you don't follow through, people won't follow you. The end.
Okay.